During the 1950s, jet airliners had become commonplace amid advances in aviation technology, and by the 1960s, supersonic passenger flights were seen as the next step in the advancement of airline travel, and the design of supersonic transports, or SSTs, was pursued by the aviation industries of different countries. During this period, development of the well-known Concorde began as a joint project between Britain and France. However, there were other SST projects being pursued elsewhere in the world. For example, around the same time, the Soviets were developing their own SST, the Tupolev Tu-144. Not wanting to see the U.S. fall behind, President Kennedy announced the National Supersonic Transport Program in June of 1963 as an American response to the Concorde and the Tu-144. The program required a design with the Mach 3 top speed, or 3 times the speed of sound, around 2,300 miles per hour, and a 2,400 mile range for domestic flights, whereas the Concorde and the Tu-144 were to have a cruising speed of Mach 2, or around 1,500 miles per hour. 3 companies submitted design proposals to the Federal Aviation Administration: North American Aviation, Lockheed, and Boeing. North American Aviation had already designed and built 2 XB-70 bomber prototypes, which are being flown on research flights at Mach 3 and high altitudes. The company's proposal was the NAC-60, which was a scaled-up version of the B-70 design. It would have been larger than the Concorde, but smaller than the Boeing and Lockheed designs, with seating for 187 passengers in a narrow-body cabin. The NAC-60 was the first design to be rejected. Lockheed's entry was the L-2000. The company had already been studying possible SST designs in the late 1950s, and this research resulted in the L-2000 design. The design consisted of a delta wing with 4 engines under the wing, with a pointed nose that could be lowered for better pilot visibility during takeoff and landing. It was to be a narrow-body design, 223 feet long and 11 feet wide, with a capacity for up to 200 passengers. Performance was to be Mach 3 and a cruising altitude of 76,000 feet. However, despite the L-2000 design being less complex, it was rejected in 1966 in favor of Boeing's design. No plane was built and was only developed as far as a mock-up having been built. Boeing's proposal, the 2707, was the most advanced and ambitious, which included swing wings that could be extended for takeoffs and landings and retracted close to the fuselage for high-speed flight. Boeing was announced as the winner of the competition in 1967. The construction of the prototype was to begin that year, with the first flight in 1970, and production was planned to begin in 1969, with test flights by 1972 and FAA approval by 1974. The passenger cabin was a wide-body design and included retractable TV screens in the tourist class cabin and smaller screens between the seats in the first class cabin. Later, the swing wing design was dropped when it was determined that it would add too much weight to the plane. The plane was redesigned to have a delta wing, bearing a resemblance to the Lockheed design. However, opposition to the SST was mounting. There were concerns about damage to the ozone layer caused by many SST flights at high altitudes. Another issue was noise, both from SSTs at airports and from sonic booms generated by supersonic flights. Supersonic flights over the U.S. were later banned. In the face of these problems and public opposition, as well as delays in the project and it being determined that the goal of a Mach 3 SST was beyond the limits of the technology of the time, government funding was ultimately cut in 1971, and the 2 planned prototypes are not completed. The Boeing 2707 mock-up was displayed in Florida until 1983 as part of an SST exhibit when the building it was housed in was bought by a church, and the mock-up was left in place with services being conducted with the mock-up looming in the background. Later, in 2013, it was moved back to Seattle, where it is undergoing restoration. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, development of the Tu-144 was taking place. Design work started in 1963, and the plane was superficially similar in design to the Concorde. The first flight of the prototype was in 1968, and in 1970 it became the first commercial transport to exceed Mach 2. Despite the crash of the first production aircraft at the 1973 Paris Air Show, the project continued, and the plane entered service in 1975, initially being flown on cargo flights. Passenger service was started in 1977, but the planes were plagued by technical problems, including excessive fuel consumption and excessive noise in the passenger cabin, as well as maintenance issues that repeatedly caused flights to be shortened or canceled. Passenger service only lasted 7 months, and following an accident the following May, the planes were withdrawn from service and relegated to cargo flights. Out of a total of 102 flights in commercial service, 55 were passenger flights, and the planes were ultimately retired from commercial service in 1983 and production was ended. The planes continued to be flown on research flights, and after the fall of the Soviet Union, one was used by NASA for research into future supersonic transports during the 1990s, with the last such flight occurring in 1999. Development of the Concorde went ahead, and it entered passenger service with British Airways and Air France in 1976. Bans on supersonic flight over land by different countries limited operations to transatlantic flights. In the ensuing years, it served a very limited niche market. Supersonic passenger flights were not economically sustainable due to high fuel and maintenance costs. Despite this, however, it was in service for many years and was retired in 2003. As of 2023, no supersonic passenger aircraft are in service, and the Concordes and Tu-144s are museum exhibits. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and check out the other videos on this channel. And always remember, when the future was cool,